Pay attention to this young man. He is 17 years old. He is pale, malnourished, and his fingers are permanently stained with blue ink. He is sitting in a cramped attic in Paris, and he has been awake for 48 hours. He is not holding a rifle. He is not holding a grenade. He is holding a fountain pen. But in the next hour, this teenager will save 30 lives. And if he falls asleep, if his hand shakes for just a fraction of a second, 30 people will die. His name is Adolfo Kaminsky. To the Nazi occupiers, he is a ghost. To the French resistance, he is the technician. He is the greatest forger of the 20th century. And he is about to wage a war against the Third Reich using nothing but a chemistry set and a piece of paper. To understand the crime, you have to understand the weapon. And in Nazi-occupied France in 1943, the deadliest weapon wasn't a Luger pistol or a Panzer tank. It was a stamp. The Germans had perfected a new kind of terror. It was a terror made of paper. Identity cards, ration books, baptismal certificates, work permits. In Paris, you were your papers. If you had the right stamp, you lived. If you had the wrong stamp, or if your card was stamped with a fatal red word JUIF, Jew, you died. It was that simple. The bureaucracy was the kill chain. Adolfo Kaminsky knew this better than anyone. Because before he was a hero, he was a victim. Adolfo was born in Argentina to Russian Jewish parents, which gave him a unique status. But in 1940, the Kaminsky family was living in Normandy. Adolfo wasn't a student. He was a worker. He had left school at 13 to support his family. He found a job at a dry cleaner's shop. This is the key detail that would change history. Adolfo didn't learn chemistry in a university. He learned it in a laundry room. He became obsessed with stains. He learned that every stain has a chemical counteragent. Ink, grease, blood, they could all be removed if you knew the molecular structure. He was a prodigy of solvents. He learned how to bleach a fabric without destroying the fiber. He learned how to alter a color without leaving a trace. He was a stain removal expert. He didn't know it yet, but he was training to become a master spy. In 1943, the reality of the occupation crashed down on the Kaminsky family. They were arrested, not because they had done anything, but because they existed. They were sent to Drancy. Drancy, the name itself is a scar on French history. It was an internment camp in the suburbs of Paris. A concrete housing project turned into a waiting room for Auschwitz. Adolfo was 17. He stood in the courtyard of Drancy and watched the trains leave. He saw the cattle cars packed with men, women, and children. He saw the processing, the lists, the stamps. He realized then that the Nazis were not just murderers, they were accountants. They managed death with ledgers. Through a diplomatic miracle, the Argentine government protested the arrest of their citizens. The Kaminsky family was released after 3 months. It was a 1 in a million chance. But Adolfo didn't walk out of Drancy the same way he walked in. He walked out with a mission. He had seen the face of the enemy. It wasn't a soldier. It was a bureaucrat with a clipboard. He knew that his family's safety was temporary. He knew they needed false papers to hide. His father sent him to make contact with the underground resistance to get papers for the family. Adolfo went to the meeting point, a shadowy cafe. He met a resistance agent. "I need papers," Adolfo said. The agent looked at him. "We have a problem," the agent said. "We have the paper. We have the stamps. But we have a specific ink we cannot erase. The French identity cards use a chemical blue ink, Waterman blue. It is indelible. We cannot alter the names without destroying the card." Adolfo looked at the agent. He thought about the dry cleaning shop. He thought about the vats of acid and milk. "Waterman blue?" Adolfo asked. "That's not indelible." The agent frowned. "Our best chemists have tried. It leaves a residue." "Lactic acid," Adolfo said. "You need lactic acid. It dissolves the blue pigment, but doesn't eat the cellulose of the paper." The agent stared at him. How do you know this? I removed stains, Adolfo said. That was the moment. The initial reaction. Adolfo didn't just get papers for his family. He volunteered to make them. He was brought into a secret laboratory. It wasn't high-tech. It was an attic in the Latin Quarter. It smelled of ether and fear. They gave him a test. A real French ID card. Remove the name Cohen, they said. Make it Cornet. Adolfo took a cotton swab. He dipped it in a solution he mixed himself. Lactic acid, a stabilizer, and a little bit of bleach. He touched the paper. The blue ink didn't smudge. It didn't blur. It simply evaporated. It vanished, leaving the paper pristine, the watermark intact. The resistance leader looked at the card. He looked at the skinny, 17-year-old boy. You didn't just change a name, the leader whispered. You just saved a life. Adolfo Kaminsky had found his calling. He wasn't going to shoot Nazis. He was going to erase them. He was going to use chemistry to dismantle the bureaucracy of the Holocaust. But he had no idea of the scale of the demand. He thought he would be making a few cards a week. He was wrong. The Gestapo was ramping up the raids. The demand for papers wasn't in the dozens. It was in the thousands. And Adolfo was the only one who knew the secret of the lactic acid. He moved into the attic. He sat down at the desk. He picked up his pen, and he entered a world where time was not measured in hours, but in heartbeats. The attic at 17 Rue de Saints Perez became the center of a shadow government. Inside, there were no windows, only blackout curtains. The air was thick with the smell of acetone, heated lead, and stale tobacco. This was the laboratory. Adolfo Kaminsky was the engine. He worked with a small team, but he was the specialist. The others could cut paper or forge signatures. But only Adolfo understood the alchemy of the ink. His investigation wasn't about finding a killer. It was about studying the killer's methods so perfectly that he could mimic them. The Nazis were masters of bureaucracy. Their identity cards were complex. They used specific watermarks, specific typefaces, specific chemical compositions for their stamps. To save a life, Adolfo had to be better than the French state. He had to be better than the German Reich. If a stamp was 1 millimeter off-center, a family died. If the ink was too fresh, a family died. If the paper grain felt wrong to the touch of a suspicious gendarme at a metro station, a family died. Adolfo became obsessed. He didn't just erase names. He built new realities. He learned photolithography. He built a camera out of scrap metal to photograph valid stamps. He created his own rubber dyes. He mixed his own inks, boiling chemicals on a hot plate to match the exact shade of administrative gray used by the prefecture. The Germans were hunting him, though they didn't know his name. They knew there was a super forger in Paris. The quality of the fake papers circulating in the city was too high. They started using ultraviolet light at checkpoints to detect chemical erasure. Adolfo countered. He invented a new wash that left no chemical residue under UV light. It was a technological arms race. The Nazis built a better trap. Adolfo built a better mouse. But the work took a physical toll. Adolfo was 17. He was starving, ration cards were scarce, and he gave most of his food to the other resistance members. He weighed less than 110 pounds. His skin turned yellow from the chemical fumes. But he couldn't stop, because the orders kept coming. Every morning, a courier would knock on the door with a list. 10 families in the 11th arrondissement. 6 children hiding in a convent. 3 British pilots downed in Normandy. Each name was a deadline. Block 3. The equation of sleep, false leads, and growing despair. Winter 1944. The false leads in this story weren't wrong clues. They were the moments of false hope. The Allies were bombing targets in France. People whispered that liberation was weeks away. But for the Jews of Paris, liberation might as well have been a century away. The deportations were accelerating. The SS wanted to cleanse Paris before they retreated. The pressure on Adolfo's lab spiked. One night, a courier arrived. He was out of breath. He looked terrified. "We have an emergency," he said. "The Nazis are planning a raid on a children's home. 300 children. They're going to Drancy tomorrow morning. 300 children." Adolfo did the math. To save them, he needed to create 300 separate documents: birth certificates, ration cards, baptismal records. 300 identities. In one night. This is the moment where the stories shift from a spy thriller to a test of human endurance. This is the growing despair. Adolfo looked at his watch. It was 8 p.m. The courier needed the papers by 6 a.m. 10 hours. He sat down at his desk. He told his team, "Coffee. Keep making coffee." He began to work. His process was a blur of motion. Dip the swab. Dissolve the Jewish name. Dry the paper. Type the new name. Stamp the seal. Sign the signature. He had to do this 300 times. And he had to do it perfectly every single time. Around 2 a.m., his vision began to blur. His hand cramped so badly he had to pry his fingers off the pen. The fumes from the solvents were making him hallucinate. He saw the faces of the children in the paper. He wanted to sleep. His body screamed for sleep. Just 5 minutes, just to rest his eyes. But then, Adolfo Kaminsky created a mathematical equation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He calculated his speed: 30 documents an hour. One document equals one life. Therefore, if I sleep for 1 hour, 30 people die. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal exchange rate. 1 hour of sleep equals 30 dead children. He stood up. He splashed cold water on his face. He slapped himself until his cheeks burned. "No sleep," he whispered. He went back to the desk. The rhythm took over. Dip. Dissolve. Dry. Stamp. He worked through the night. He worked until his eyes bled from the strain. He worked until he passed out from the fumes, fell off his chair, hit the floor, woke up, climbed back into the chair, and kept working. At 5:55 a.m., the courier returned. Adolfo handed him a suitcase. It was heavy. Inside were 300 new lives. The courier ran. Adolfo collapsed onto the floor of the attic. He didn't dream. He just blacked out. When he woke up that evening, he didn't know if he had succeeded. He just knew he was still alive, and there was a new list on the table. But the danger was getting closer. The dead end was approaching. The Germans were using direction-finding trucks to locate resistance radios, but they were also tracking the paper. They noticed a pattern. The forged documents often used stamps from the same few municipalities. They began to narrow down the sector. They were triangulating the Alchemist. One afternoon, Adolfo left the attic to deliver a package personally, a rare breach of protocol. He was walking down the Boulevard Saint-Michel. He carried a leather satchel containing 50 blank ID cards and his stamp kit. He saw a checkpoint ahead. Feldgendarmerie, German military police. They were stopping everyone, checking bags. Adolfo stopped. He turned around. Behind him, another patrol. He was trapped. If they opened his bag, he would be tortured and executed. But worse, they would find the stamps. They would find the source. The entire network would fall. He had seconds to decide. Adolfo stood on the Boulevard Saint-Michel. 50 blank ID cards and a federal crime in his bag. The patrol in front. The patrol behind. He didn't run. Running is a confession. He realized in that split second that his greatest camouflage wasn't a disguise. It was his own exhaustion. He looked like a starving, beaten-down Parisian teenager. He looked like a nobody. He shifted the heavy bag on his shoulder. He slumped his posture. He forced his face into a mask of dull, bovine stupidity. He walked straight toward the German officer. The officer raised his hand. "Halt! Papers!" Adolfo fumbled in his pocket. He produced his own ID card, a masterpiece of forgery. Of course, But the officer wasn't looking at the card. He was looking at the bag. "What is in the satchel?" the officer barked. Adolfo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He opened his mouth. He could lie. He could say it was laundry. He could say it was school books. "Sandwiches," Adolfo mumbled, his voice cracking like a nervous child. "And my lunch." The officer looked at the scrawny boy. He looked at the heavy leather bag. He could have opened it. He could have ended the resistance in that sector right there. But he was tired. It was raining, and Adolfo looked pathetic. "Get out of here," the officer sneered. He shoved Adolfo forward. Adolfo walked away. He didn't look back. He didn't speed up. He walked one block, turned the corner, and then collapsed against a wall, vomiting from the adrenaline overdose. He had survived, but the lingering doubt began to set in. He was 18 now. He had saved thousands of lives, but he was losing himself. The chemicals were destroying his eyesight. He was going blind in one eye. His hands shook so badly in the mornings he had to hold his coffee with two hands. He began to wonder, how long can I cheat the law of averages? August 1944. The Allies were approaching Paris. The city was in uprising. Barricades in the streets. Molotov cocktails. Most resistance fighters grabbed guns. They ran to the barricades to fight the retreating Germans. Adolfo wanted to go. He wanted to fight. He wanted to see the sun. But his commander stopped him. "No," the commander said. "You stay in the attic. The Germans are leaving, but they're taking prisoners with them. We need papers for the agents who are going to cut them off." While Paris celebrated, while the bells of Notre Dame rang for freedom, Adolfo sat in the dark, smelling acetone, forging papers for the spies who would hunt the Nazis into Germany. He heard the cheers from the street below. He felt a profound isolation. He was the man who made the victory possible, yet he couldn't participate in it. Block 5, the impossible passport, the breakthrough. Paris was free, but the war was not over. And Adolfo's war, the war of ink, was about to enter a new, sophisticated phase. The French intelligence service recruited him. They didn't care about his age. They cared about his hands. They needed him to forge documents for agents dropping behind enemy lines in Nazi Germany. This was the breakthrough. The moment Adolfo moved from defensive forgery, saving victims, to offensive forgery, hunting villains. But the Nazis had a new defense: the Swiss passport. It was the holy grail of travel documents. Neutral, respected, and technically impossible to forge. The Swiss used a paper with a complex, multi-layered watermark and a specific chemical reaction to UV light. It was considered counterfeit-proof. The French intelligence officers came to Adolfo. "We need to get an agent into Berlin," they said. "He needs to be Swiss. Can you do it?" Adolfo took a real Swiss passport. He studied it under his microscope. He touched the paper. He smelled it. He realized the Germans were relying on the paper's texture to detect fakes. If he tried to erase the ink, the paper's tooth, its roughness, would be smoothed out. A smooth spot meant a fake. Adolfo retreated to his lab. He stopped thinking like a forger and started thinking like a dry cleaner. He needed to create a new kind of dirt. He developed a technique that remains a legend in the world of espionage. He didn't just erase the ink. He rebuilt the paper fiber by fiber. He used microscopic dust, mixed with a binding agent, to retexture the erased area. He created a fake Swiss passport. He handed it to the intelligence officer. "Test it," Adolfo said. The officer took it to a lab. They put it under UV light. They used chemical reagents. They rubbed it. It passed. Adolfo Kaminsky had broken the unbreakable code. He had created a key that could open any door in the Third Reich. With these papers, Allied agents slipped into Germany. They tracked troop movements. They located V-2 rocket sites. They hunted war criminals. Adolfo was no longer just saving children. He was helping to drive the stake into the heart of the monster. May 1945. Berlin fell. The war ended. Adolfo put down his pen. He was 19 years old. He had forged documents for 14,000 people. He had never fired a gun. He had never killed a man. But he had defeated the SS bureaucracy. The story should end here. The hero retires. The legacy begins. But this is true crime. And in true crime, the compulsion doesn't just stop. Adolfo walked out of the attic. He tried to be normal. He became a photographer. He took pictures of the Eiffel Tower, of lovers by the Seine. He tried to capture the light he had missed for 4 years. But the world was still broken. In the late 1940s, a new war began. The survivors of the Holocaust were trying to reach Palestine. The British were blockading the ports. They needed papers. Then came the Algerian War of Independence. The French government, the same government Adolfo had served, was now torturing Algerians. They needed papers to escape. Then came the anti-apartheid fighters in South Africa. They needed papers. Adolfo realized a terrifying truth about himself. He couldn't stop. As long as there was persecution, he had a moral obligation to cheat the system. He became the forger of the revolution. For 30 years, he lived a double life. By day, a humble photographer in a darkroom. By night, the shadow banker of every liberation movement in the world. He worked for free. He never took a cent. If I take money, he said, I am a mercenary. If I do it for free, I am a revolutionary. But this life had a cost, a terrible cost. He sacrificed his own identity to give identities to others. He couldn't tell his wife. He couldn't tell his children. He was a ghost in his own home, and the danger never left. Intelligence agencies from a dozen countries were hunting the mysterious forger of Paris. They didn't know it was the quiet man taking photos of pigeons in the park. By 1962, Adolfo Kaminsky was the most prolific forger in history, and he was completely broke. He lived in a tiny apartment. He wore secondhand clothes. To his neighbors, he was a struggling photographer who smelled faintly of chemicals. To the French secret police, the DST, he was a phantom. They knew someone was supplying flawless documents to the Algerian National Liberation Front, FLN. They knew someone was helping anti-apartheid fighters enter South Africa. They found the papers on captured agents. They analyzed the ink. They traced the watermarks. And they hit a wall. The papers were too perfect. They looked more real than the real ones. This is the confrontation. It wasn't an interrogation under a swinging light bulb. It was a confrontation with the limits of his own luck. Adolfo was tired. He was in his 40s now. The adrenaline that fueled him at 17 was gone, replaced by a chronic, gnawing anxiety. Every knock on the door made him jump. Every click on his telephone line sounded like a wiretap. He had a wife now. He had children. 2 young kids who had no idea that their father was a criminal mastermind wanted by 3 different governments. He had a rule: keep the worlds separate. But the worlds were colliding. One night, in 1971, he was forging a passport for a revolutionary from Guinea. His hand shook. He dropped a drop of ink on the photograph. He stared at the ruin. It was a mistake. A rookie mistake. Adolfo realized something terrifying. He was losing his edge. And in his line of work, losing your edge doesn't mean you get fired. It means someone gets executed. He thought about the equation from the attic in 1944. 1 hour of sleep equals 30 lives. Now, the equation had changed. 1 mistake equals my family. He realized he couldn't be the alchemist forever. The world was changing. The causes were getting murkier. The freedom fighters he supported were starting to look more like terrorists. Violence was escalating. He had to make a choice, not between life and death, but between identity and safety. He didn't wait for the police to kick down the door. He didn't wait to be betrayed. He decided to commit the ultimate act of forgery. He forged his own disappearance. One night, he went into his darkroom. He didn't turn on the red light. He turned on the main light. He took his stamps, the rubber dies he had carved by hand for 30 years. The stamps that had saved Jews, Algerians, South Africans, draft dodgers. He took a hammer. Smash. He destroyed the Swiss watermark plate. Smash. He destroyed the French Republic seal. Smash. He destroyed the South African visa stamp. He poured his chemical solutions down the drain. The lactic acid, the bleach, the ink, the smell of saving lives washed away into the Paris sewers. He gathered his files, the names of the 14,000 people he had saved, the contacts, the networks. He burned them. It was a ritual suicide of his alter ego. Adolfo Kaminsky, the forger, died that night in 1971. The next morning, Adolfo Kaminsky, the photographer, walked out of his apartment. He looked the same, but he was empty. He had laid down his weapon. He never forged another document. For the next 30 years, he kept his mouth shut. He raised his children. He took photos of landscapes. He grew old. His beard turned white. His children knew nothing. They thought their father was just a quiet, slightly sad man who liked chemistry sets. Imagine the discipline that takes. To have been a secret king, a man who held the power of life and death in his pen, and then to become a nobody. To watch the news and see Nelson Mandela released from prison, knowing you forged the papers for his agents, and saying nothing. This is the confession. It didn't happen in a court. It happened in a kitchen. In roughly 2002, his daughter, Sarah, found something. She was writing a book about her father's photography. She was digging through old boxes in the closet. She found an old magnifying glass, a strange, heavy ruler, and a single, unburnt scrap of paper with a chemical formula scrawled on it. She asked him, "Papa, what is this?" Adolfo looked at her. He was an old man now. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The world was different. The statute of limitations had passed. He sat her down. He poured a cup of coffee. And for the first time in 60 years, the alchemist spoke. "I was a forger," he said. He told her everything. The attic, the equation of sleep, the 300 children in one night, the wars, the silence. Sarah listened, tears streaming down her face. She realized she wasn't sitting with a photographer. She was sitting with one of the greatest unsung heroes of the 20th century. She wrote a book, Adolfo Kaminsky, A Forger's Life. And suddenly, the ghost was visible. When the truth came out, the world was stunned. Journalists flocked to the small apartment in Paris. They expected to find a hardened spy, a political radical, a man of war. Instead, they found a frail old man with a long white beard who shuffled when he walked and spoke in a whisper. Adolfo Kaminsky didn't look like a hero. He looked like Santa Claus. But the justice in this story isn't a gavel banging in a courtroom. It is a mathematical calculation. Historians began to tally the numbers. During the occupation, 14,000 documents. During the Algerian War, countless more. Anti-apartheid activists. Draft dodgers avoiding the Vietnam meat grinder. Adolfo Kaminsky hadn't just forged papers. He had forged the history of the 20th century. In 2009, the French government finally acknowledged him. They offered him the Legion of Honor, the highest order of merit in France. For the boy who had been kicked out of his home, interned at Drancy, and hunted by the Gestapo, it was the ultimate vindication. But Adolfo hesitated. He had spent a lifetime erasing his name. Putting it on a medal felt wrong. He accepted it, not for himself, but for the shadows in the attic, for the friends who didn't make it, for the courier who ran the 300 IDs to the children's home and never came back. But the true legacy of Adolfo Kaminsky isn't a medal. It's the people. Think about the math. 14,000 lives saved in 1944. Those 14,000 people had children, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. If you stood all the descendants of the people Adolfo saved in a line, they would fill a stadium. Doctors, teachers, artists, parents. A forest of humanity grown from a single seed planted in a dark attic. Adolfo Kaminsky died in January 2023. He was 97 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep. The man who had spent his youth calculating that 1 hour of sleep equals 30 deaths finally earned his rest. At his funeral, there were no speeches about violence. There were number 21 gun salutes. There was just a profound sense of awe, because Adolfo Kaminsky taught us something that the history books often forget. We are taught that wars are won by generals on maps, by atomic bombs, by massive armies. But Adolfo proved that a war can be fought with a fountain pen. He proved that resistance doesn't always look like a clenched fist. Sometimes it looks like a stain being removed from a piece of paper. He proved that you don't need to be powerful to stop a monster. You just need to be precise. You just need to be skilled. And you need to care enough to stay awake when the rest of the world has gone to sleep. The Nazis believed in the purity of blood. Adolfo Kaminsky believed in the purity of ink. And in the end, the ink won. The Third Reich is ash. The statues are toppled. The 1,000-year empire is a dark memory. But the papers Adolfo forged, they're still out there, tucked away in grandmother's trunks, hidden in family albums. They're the false documents that became real life. This is the story of the Alchemist of Paris, the teenager who looked at the bureaucracy of death and decided to edit it. And because he did, thousands of worlds were allowed to exist.